Okay, our last deadlift common fault here. These are a couple faults that occur on the eccentric component of the lift. So, assuming that we've gotten to the lockout successfully, a couple things. One of the things I oftentimes see with novice deadlifters is they will flex the knees first on the eccentric or downward portion of the lift, and you'll see that here. And one of the things we can see from a lateral view is the bar path actually travels anteriorly out over the toes. Okay, so as we mentioned, the bar should always go straight up and down over the middle of the foot. We shouldn't see deviation anteriorly or posteriorly. I want to keep it pretty tight there over the midfoot. So the error here again, flexing the knees, and that puts the knees, again, kind of blocking that bar path, and the bar has no choice but to then go, again, kind of out around the knee. So it's going out even further and then kind of back down over the midfoot. So obviously, the issue here is that we want to see the hips being pushed back first. So flex the hips first, and that's one of the cues you could use is hips back. You could get someone standing 6 inches from a wall and tell them to touch their butt back to the wall from the top of the deadlift, or maybe 3 or 4 inches. You don't have to be that far away. But the idea would be to push the hips back rather than seeing the hips here are just dropping straight down, and that pushes the knees too far forward.
Yeah, and this, I think, not to cut you off there, but I think these are the folks that are more quad dominant. I'll see this a lot as well. One, because they're quad dominant and it makes sense and feels better for them to go into their quads rather than into the glutes and hamstrings. But I also think there's kind of this fear of allowing the chest to fall too far forward and then causing the bar to go away from the body, causing then some spinal flexion. But if you roll it back just a little bit, there tends to be spinal flexion anyways, but you see it more so in the lumbar region, a little bit lower rather than in the thoracic by the bar floating out too far in front. So you can kind of see the hips are muted out here, and we're getting to that posterior tilt rather than maintaining a neutral spine. So even though I think people's physiological reason for doing this is, or anatomical, biomechanical reason, is that they want to try to keep their spine neutral, but they think of neutral as being a vertical spine rather than just flat. And so, the knees get a lot of the kind of the brunt of this here, where the bar rests there. And again, it's more knee dominant rather than equally, just like the concentric, we want them to pair up on the concentric phase, we want them to pair up on the eccentric phase as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of this has to do with people just not knowing how to load the posterior chain. And so teaching a Romanian deadlift or teaching just a basic hip hinge of any kind. And what does that feel like when I push into my glutes and hamstrings and kind of feel a little bit of tension there? That's a great way to address this, is correcting that first.
Yeah, and so in general, when you're dealing with athletes and you just like nothing works, you just are. I've ran into this where it's like the words don't work, the mechanical, emotional, and tactile cueing does not work, and we're like weeks into this thing, and it gets frustrating because you can't just let them off into the wild and say whatever, just do it your way, because we're going to then risk injury. And first order of business is do no harm. So one of the things that I like to do is to put them on blocks, or basically elevate the bar to where the bar is just at the top of the knee, because for whatever reason, I think mechanically people struggle with the timing of their knees and hips. And that's kind of this conversation that we had in previous videos, and here is that there's a timing issue. So get all of that out of the way and get them comfortable with just kind of standing up and sitting down. And if you need to do that by elevating the bar above the knees to get it out of the way, that is a strategy I've used in the past. And it also really, it not only strengthens the posterior chain because we're putting them there, but it also gets them comfortable loading the backside rather than getting so much into the quads.
Yeah, great point. One of the other issues that we'll see kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum here, rather than kind of going around the knees, is if the hips push back too much without any knee flexion, as you see kind of here, we're loading the posterior chain, but the bar is now being kind of pushed away from the body a little bit. It's almost too much. It's, we want the bar to stay close to the body, up and down on the eccentric and concentric. And so there has to be, again, that mix or balance. The ratio has to be correct in hip flexion and knee flexion on both phases, concentric and eccentric. So one of the fixes to this error of kind of going around the knees is, like I mentioned, cueing, push the hips back, but we also don't want to go too far in that direction where we turn it into this type of position where the bar is out in front of the toes or away from the midfoot or away from the body.
Yeah, and again, it's just remember that the quads are acting eccentrically here too, and they're not acting eccentrically until way until the bar is lowered substantially. So remember that they're acting eccentrically too, so they need to load up and be stretched as well. And the timing of that is really key here.
Yeah. Okay, so that wraps up some of our discussion here on common faults in the deadlift, how to coach and cue those. We hope you guys found some value in this, and hopefully these ideas, you'll be able to take these and implement them with yourself and your own training, your clients, athletes, anybody you're working with. Thank you guys for watching.